A question that we have, especially during this time of year, during this season of change in our lives. A lot of you guys have already gone out of high school, college. Guys, we're in the middle of summer, and there's a question that's going around a lot right now. If not around right now, you guys had it a couple months ago. And that question is, what's the life that God wants us to live? And maybe you're still in high school or you're in middle school, but that question you've been asking this question a lot more lately than before. The short answer is this: God wants you to walk in the Spirit and to be true worshipers of His. Okay, but if you want the long answer, keep watching. Welcome. My name is Abigail Estrada, and these are extension classes for our student ministry in El Buen Pastor. And we are here to help our teens start out their relationship with God, or to have a deeper, meaningful relationship with God. So if you're interested in these kind of videos, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button down below for more content like this. If you like this video, hit the like button. All right, so what's the life that God wants us to live? We ask this question on and off, especially during our times in high school when graduation is creeping up. And we start asking this question when people start asking us, what college are we going to go into? What career are we going to have? And what are we going to do? And then at church, they turn around and ask about your ministry, your calling, and they ask about all these different questions of us. And, summer's here, and a lot of us have found an answer, but there's a lot of us that haven't found that answer yet of what is the next steps? What am I going to do now? What am I going to do now? So we want to know what's next, and we think of our future plans, but this is the part that we have to say, wait. We have to say wait to this, because we want to know, okay, God, tell me what school should I go into? God, tell me what career path I should go into. God, ask Him to tell us specifically career, school, and all these things, because we want to know our future. We want to know what God's plans. We want to make sure what we're doing is right and correct. But we need to slow down for a minute. We got to stop and we got to reflect real quick. Before we think of future plans, of our careers, of future goals, and even our ministry, we need to think of our everyday life. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, Abigail, this is not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what college should I go into? What career should I go into? I want to talk about those things, Abigail. I want to know those things. But before we can go there, we need to think about how God wants us to live our everyday life. Those answers that we're looking for is pan comino. It's a piece of cake after that. But we need to focus on our everyday before we can think of our future. All right? So how does God want us to spend our everyday life? So when we're looking at Galatians 5:16, it says, So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Okay, we know this verse, we hear this verse a lot, but a lot of times we quote the verse wrong. And a lot of the times we interpret this verse very wrong as well. What do I mean by this? Okay, so what does it mean to live by the Spirit? Let's go with that first. Living in the Spirit means to live a life that is submitted to God. Okay, so we already talked in past classes the difference between submission and surrender. And what God wants us to do is He wants us to live a submitted life. Followed after that, He wants us to learn obedience, and then He wants us to humble ourselves. We're gonna go into learn obedience in a minute. So living in the Spirit means to flow in the Spirit, which means to live in the fruit of the Spirit, which is like love, joy, goodness, kindness, long suffering, peace, patience, faithfulness, self-control, so on and so forth. I can keep going. I think those are all though. He doesn't want us to be governed by pride in our five senses, because this leads us to separation from God. And He doesn't want us to be separated from God. So watch this. When when we're talking about living in the spirit, we're talking about living submitted to him. And when we're talking about living submitted to him, remember, it has to be something that we do willingly. We're not forced to, oppressed, or to, made to. It's something that we willingly do because we love him, we submit to him, and we know everything that he has in store for us is for our good. All right. And then when we're talking about living obedience, is living the life that he wants us to live on our everyday life, not when nos conviene, when we see that, I can get something out of it, when it's convenient for us, but because we love him, we obey him in everything that happens. There's a verse in the book of John. I can't remember if it's John chapter 15, when it talks about, if you love me, you would obey my commands. And that's what it means to be living in obedience. What does it mean to obey my commands? There's two commands that it means, and that is to live in the spirit and to be true worshipers in God. And what we're talking about right now is to live in the spirit. And that's what it means to live in obedience. So he goes, okay, so to live in the spirit is to be obedient. To be obedient, what? To live in the spirit. That's confusing, Abigail. Yes, it is. But that's why we come into the other two, live in submission and to humble ourselves. And to humble ourselves is like the next step of submitting, because to humble ourselves, if you guys remember in Journey to the Cross, to humble ourselves is a cloak of protection. A lot of the times we think that when we humble ourselves, we make ourselves vulnerable, and we don't want to be vulnerable. And the thing is that it's not necessarily that we're making ourselves vulnerable. What we're doing is we are protecting ourselves from everything and anyone and anything. So when we protect ourselves, it's by humbling ourselves. Nobody can humble anybody that's already humbled. And that's what happened with Jesus in the Journey to the Cross. So more information on that, go to the Journey to the Cross. All right. And live in the spirit means to flow in the spirit, love, joy, peace, and kindness. But the second part of the verse, it says, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Okay. So a lot of people think that if we live by the spirit, then to live by the spirit, we need to stop gratifying the desires of the flesh. That's not what the verse is saying. The verse is not saying to live in the spirit, we need to stop. It doesn't say that. It says live in the spirit and you will not. You see the difference? You hear the difference? You will not. In other words, if we start living in the spirit, we will stop automatically without trying. We will stop satisfying the desires of our flesh. But that means that we can no longer be governed with our pride, our ego, not allowing our five senses take control of us. And this means that we need to be separated from the world and no longer be governed by our logic, our understanding of the world's understanding of things, but to really learn to submit to God and learn what God sees in the world. Like right now in our journey classes, we're talking about money. The world sees money a certain way, but God sees money in a totally different aspect. And the thing is that we need to learn how the world sees money. Yeah, but we can never forget what God says about money. And the thing is that it comes down to our spiritual walk with God. How do we know what God says about money if we never submit to God and are willing to hear what he has to say about money? All right, so the second point is to be true worshipers. What does God mean to be a true worshiper? Being a true worshiper goes beyond having a good voice, an instrument to play. You don't need to be a musician and you don't need to be a professional singer to be a true worshiper. Okay, let me just say that right now, because if that was the case, not a lot of us would be true worshipers. Okay. So when God is listening to our worship, he's going beyond the surface level. He's not listening to what the world listens to. What the world listens to is something that is, I don't know, they're just listening to the professional sound. What God is listening to is to our hearts and our motivation behind our worship. True worshipers is expressing our love to him. So real quick, what does worship mean? Worship means to worship him for who he is. We worship him because he is what? He is God. He is omnipotent, omnipresent. He is the great I am, all we're ever going to need. He is Elohim, he is so many things, right? And the thing is that because he is so many things, that's why we worship him. But the only ones that can really worship him are the ones that know him, because the thing is that we're worshiping him because of who he is. If I don't know him, I can't worship him, not in truth, because I am worshiping him because of, a lot of times we're worshiping him because of what we perceive him to be, what we think he is, and what people tell us about him. But because we don't know him, because we never had an experience with him, we can't really worship him for who he is because we don't know him that way. One of the greatest examples is actually Abraham and his son Isaac. Abraham knew God in a certain way, but he never knew him as provider. It wasn't until Isaac was going to be sacrificed was going to be sacrificed, when he really knew God as provider. And from that point on, Abraham knew him as provider. But Isaac, he had that ingrained in his head since he was young as provider. So his worship of provider is so different than his dad's, because he was about to die. He was about to be sacrificed. And in that moment, he knew God as provider. It wasn't because of a second because someone told him about God in that way, but it was an actual experience, a relationship he had with God in such a way that he knew God as provider. And true worshipers, because we know God intimately in our relationship with him, then we can really worship him in spirit and truth, because we know him, not because of what people told us about him, but because of our relationship that we have with him. We truly know who God is. All right. So it's important to analyze our hearts. A lot of the times, many times we worship him because we are expected to worship him, because we need or want something from him. If we worship him in such a way, then you know what? That's not the worship that he will ever receive. That worship we give him is mediocre worship. It's like a resounding gong to him. He will not accept that worship at all, because it's not meaningful, it's not heartfelt, and it's not because you know him and love him that you worship him, but because you want to get something out of him. All right. So it's important to analyze our hearts. Why do we worship? What are we governed by? Are we governed by our emotions, by our wants and desires? Are we governed by our pride, our ego, our five senses? Or are we flowing and being governed by the fruit of the Spirit? What is taking over our lives? Why do I worship him? What are my motives? While yes, it is important to know our next step in life, while yes, it's important to know our future, whether what college am I going into, what career I'm going into, what am I going to do next, what are my next steps? Today, I want you guys to focus on something else. Yes, your future is important, but your now is equally as important. Your present is as important as your future, because your present will dictate your future. It's today that will help form your tomorrow, guys. And that's what I want you guys to focus on right now. But you might be thinking, but Abigail, I need to know now. I need to know now. I need to go into work. I need to go into college. I need you to breathe and focus on your now. Focus on your everyday, because your everyday will dictate your tomorrow. Your today, your right now, the choice you make right now in this moment is what's going to bring about your future. Remember, pan comino after you can figure this part out. Piece of cake after you can figure out how to live your everyday life. Because then after you know God, you've had an intimate relationship with God, after you can take that next step with him, these questions that you're asking, they will become obvious to you. Why? Because your deep connection with God, you will be able to really hear his voice. Here's the thing. God is always speaking. God is always talking to us. But the thing is that we haven't learned to listen. We haven't learned to train our ears to really listen to God. So when he speaks, we don't always hear him. Looking at our everyday life and practicing and learning how to live the life that God wants us to live, we practice our ears to hear. And when we can pull that off, When we have these big questions, it becomes easier. Those of you guys that are in middle school or still in high school, you guys have the opportunity to learn that now. Those of you that are out of high school, in college, adults even probably, the thing is, you haven't lost your opportunity to learn from God. You haven't lost your opportunity to hear the voice now. But my encouragement for you today is this: slow down, take a breath, and take it one step at a time. God bless you, everybody. I'll see you guys next time. Those of you that are interested, we are continuing our classes every Mondays and Wednesdays with our journey group. More information in the description down below. This is where the part I say, God bless you. See you guys next time. Bye.